Okay, good morning, everybody. Today is Saturday, March 29th, and it's 11 a.m. Eastern Time. This is episode 7, and we're going to be talking about Nutanix Enterprise AI. And it really is hot off the last episode, right? When we talked to Daemon about where people are with AI today, I think it was important for us to review that because I think a lot of enterprise folks are still trying to determine how to enter the space, and it's not just enterprise, but pretty much everybody, right? I think there are different levels of expertise, right, that we see across the enterprise landscape. Anywhere from I'm just starting out, how do I start, all the way to we're testing it, but also we have some things in production today. And I think just to go back to the conversation that Damon and I had last week about three key points before we get into the actual demo to show you the actual platform. The first point is really taking an introspective look at what it is you're trying to do. What are you trying to accomplish, right? And I think that's extremely important because, as Damon and I talked about, we talked about processes or complex processes that you may want to make easier or simplified with AI, but really taking a look at those complex processes and determining if those processes are valid candidates, right, or use cases are valid candidates for AI enablement, right? And the reason why we say it is because you could be wasting time. You could be taking a complex process or an unnecessary process and applying AI to it and spending funds or spending dollars on things that you may not need or could change, or the process could be removed completely, right? So it's important that you map out what it is you're trying to do, get deep into the process, understanding what are these things, right, that you're doing, if they make sense or not, and determining if those things can be simplified or augmented or completely replaced with the use of AI. Now, that could be many different use cases, right? Could be use cases around chatbots, could be use cases around agentic AI. If you're really interested in learning about agentic AI, or go to the end of the podcast, and Dana and I talked about where agents are playing a role or agentic AI is playing a role. But I would say that you got to start somewhere. And just to go back on what we were talking about as well, is this: the second thing is, how do I adopt AI? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to let your internal folks, your internal teams, actually leverage AI, and that way you can learn from that. And what I mean by that is, start getting your folks using Copilot, right? If or some internal solution that you're creating, right? Before you delve into giving access to customers, or putting into product for customers or a service for customers, make sure how to use AI properly, implement it, use it, leverage it, and of course operationalize it. And we talked about having this AI center of excellence. I also think that you need to have an AI operating model, which layers on top of the cloud operating model. I don't think it needs to be a different operating model. I just think it's an additional layer that layers on top of that. And as a matter of fact, when we get into how we look at AI at Nutanix and what we're providing from a platform service capability, I'm going to talk you through the three different ways you can consume enterprise AI. And where we really see a ton of value is the full stack, hands down, the infrastructure side of it, the Kubernetes side of it, the AI side of it, the data side of it. So imagine having this full platform that can deliver on all those things, because that's what customers are asking for. They're asking for turnkey platforms, not, oh, I want to use this from an inference engine perspective, but I want to layer it on my VMware stack, and then it has a SAN or has some filer behind it for my data, or an object service behind it. And now I have, again, multiple silos, right, that you have to manage separately, and you have to stitch and glue together to make it work properly. And then if something goes wrong, guess what? You're going back to that and having problems and trying to figure things out, right? So I think what's different about Nutanix in this space is that I wouldn't say we're not providing a reference architecture. We are, right? But we're also providing a product. And that's the difference between us and a lot of the competition that's out there. There really isn't a product around it. They've productized a reference architecture, which is not what we've done here. Okay. And so let's get into it a little bit and talk about what I'm talking about. So Nutanix Enterprise AI is really a platform service. Okay. And it can be consumed basically in three different ways. You can consume it in your own infrastructure on your own Kubernetes. Okay, so you can layer an AI on top of your infrastructure, no matter what it is. It could be bare metal Kubernetes, could be a different Kubernetes offering on a virtual stack, VMware, etc., and layer it on top of that. You can use an AI in the cloud and use the cloud infrastructure on the back end, and I want to talk about the benefits of that. Or you can use an AI in a full stack capability that Nutanix can deliver for you. Okay, meaning we provide the full stack. You've already seen 90, 80%, 85, 90% of the stack already through the episodes up to this episode 7. Okay, so episodes 1 through 5, we're really focused on the core capabilities in the stack, right? Moving into data services, so virtualization, obviously, right? Obvious. So basically, enterprise table stakes functionality, virtual machines, storage, networking, compute, etc., into data services with files and objects, into Kubernetes, right, from a cloud native perspective, and now moving into enterprise AI. Now, if you layer AI on top of all of that, you get a full stack offering. And it's not just about the value is not just about the enterprise AI capability, which we're going to dig into. It's also about the full stack underneath. So we've made that simple. You saw how simple it was for me to implement that and to operationalize that. It's very, very simple. It's not complex. Okay. And that's some of the value too around the full stack experience. Now, again, you have other ways of consuming enterprise AI. So don't think that Nutanix is locking you into the stack. We're not. Again, it goes back to simplicity, flexibility, and choice. And that's what Nutanix provides. Okay. So let's get into, of course, the demo. And where we think it starts, okay, is really starts at the Kubernetes layer. Assuming you have the underlying compute already built, right? Whether again that's VMware or bare metal offering, maybe you're running Red Hat on bare metal, okay, and you want to leverage NAI, and you're going to see why you want to use NAI in a few minutes because it's not just this reference architecture where we're stitching these things together, and then you're going to NVIDIA and getting downloading these container packs from NGC, or you're getting all these different and you're downloading models. We're doing that for you, okay, and I think that's the benefit. It's complete lifecycle management around and control around language models. And I notice I didn't say LLMs because SLMs are starting to become a thing. Okay. But language models, whether they're large language models or small language models, but also creating those endpoints, right? That you can just pass those APIs to your developers, right? And I'm going to show you how simple this is. All right. Now we are in NKP right now, and I'm going to maximize this here in a minute, but let's go to the cluster view. And as we go to the cluster view, you see here that I've created a cluster called NAI. Okay. So let's look at the details of this cluster. So let's go to the node pools. And you can see here I have basically two node pools, worker node pools. One is called MD0 and one is called GPU-VX2XM. Okay, down here. Okay. So essentially I've deployed this this Kubernetes cluster via NKP. You saw me do this in episode 4. Okay. And you can go back and look at NKP if you don't understand what NKP is, but it's our Kubernetes platform. And in my case, I'm leveraging the Nutanix platform underneath. Okay. And again, it goes back to you don't have to do that. You can leverage NKP and you can layer it on top of anything, bare metal, VMware, whatever. Okay. You want to leverage your own infrastructure, so be it. Okay. But again, I'm just trying to show you the value of the complete full stack here. Okay. So we've deployed the cluster, and you can see here again this GPU pool, which is basically consists of one node. And if I go in here, I apologize for that here. Let me just go click this link and hit edit. You can see here that I have a worker node here. It's only one node. It's got 16 vCPUs, 40 gigs of memory, 300 gigs of size, and it has a pass-through L4 NVIDIA L4 GPU pass through to it. Now, you don't have to do it this way. You can also use vGPU if you have the licensing, right? And that's an NVIDIA thing, so you'll have to get the licensing from NVIDIA. But in my case, I have one GPU and I'm passing it through um, to this Kubernetes node. Now, because I only have one, it's really an entry level GPU. I know a lot of people are saying L4. That's it's pretty good size, right? I mean, as far as the memory, the buffer, the GPU memory, it's pretty large, 24 gigs, right? So I can fit a pretty good sized model within that GPU's memory. Of course, it's still an L4. It's not an L40S. It's not an H100 or by any means, right? Or any of the new um, stuff coming out from NVIDIA, but it does the job, right? For the most part, in most cases. But I want to just preface this because I'm limited to one GPU. I'm going to be going back and forth between two different environments, okay? One environment is a demo environment that we use at Nutanix that has multiple GPUs, okay? And we're going to build to that, and I'm going to show you what that looks like because when you start looking at multi-model chat flows or multi-model, multi-agent flows, you're going to need multiple GPUs in most cases, okay? And so this becomes a question of how what you want to do, how you want to do it. And it goes back to what Daemon and I talked about again about the financial feasibility of what you're doing, right? Because we can all come in and say we want AI to solve everything for us, but you have to back into that as far as the financial aspect. What is my value I'm gaining out of it? Am I getting enough value versus the cost? Okay, that's the important metric there, right? And so you want to manage that slowly. But to go back to what I'm saying, I'm limited in my lab because I have one L4 GPU. So again, I'll be going back and forth between multiple environments, and I will tell you when I'm going to another environment. Okay. For now, I'm in my home lab running NKP, and I've deployed this NAI cluster to deploy NAI. Now, what are the prerequisites to actually install the software, right? Well, the prerequisites are basically part of the NKP application catalog. Okay, so which means that you don't have to go in and deploy all these Helm charts manually. You can go in and actually do this through the application catalog to make it very simple. You basically need four things, right? Actually, five things to deploy NAI. Okay, first you need a Kubernetes cluster, of course. You need a GPU node. Now, there is a way to bypass GPU and do this compute only for POCs or testing. I don't recommend that because it's very slow. Like you're using CPU to do inferencing, it's horrible experience. Okay, but if you can get a GPU, right, or a small GPU, right, maybe one GPU just to do some testing, or two GPUs to do some testing for multi-model or multimodal chats or agentic AI, then that would be beneficial in a real POC. Okay, so you can see here I'm in the application catalog under my AI workspace for this cluster, and you can see here I have a couple things here enabled. The first thing you need to have, again, is a Kubernetes cluster. The second thing is you need to have a Kubernetes cluster with a GPU, at least a GPU worker node, right, and a node pool. Then you need to install the GPU operator, the NVIDIA GPU operator. I think I passed it. So let's go back up here. Maybe I didn't. There it is. Okay, so you have the NVIDIA GPU operator that you can install and enable right through here. Just click on this and hit enable. You can already see it's enabled. Then you're going to go back up here and you're going to install Istio service mesh. So you need to enable that. Okay. And then you're going to install Knative over here to the right, Knative. Okay. And then one thing that's missing from this is Kserve. You have to install that manually, but that's going to be added here very, very shortly in the catalog. It's a very, very simple Helm chart installation, if I could talk. And then, of course, you can also deploy Enterprise AI when those things are installed and ready, right? You can also deploy Enterprise AI through the catalog as well. I did not do that because current version of the catalog only supports a release previous to the latest release. In my lab, I like to be in the latest release to test the current features. So 2.1 is the previous release. 2.2 is the current release of NAI. Okay, when I say NAI, I mean the actual platform service for AI, which we're going to talk about and get into. And but you can install it through the catalog, and you can enable the dashboard. So just like you have these applications, when you go in here and you can launch the dashboard under NAI, right? This dashboard will become blue and you'll be able to launch the dashboard. When you launch the dashboard, it'll take you into a login, okay? And this is what the login looks like, all right? So the first thing I'm gonna do is log in as the admin account, okay? Now, of course, you're not gonna use the admin account, all right? So the very first thing you wanna do is create your users, and we need to talk about that. So we're into Nutanix Enterprise AI, and we're gonna get to users. And you can see here, I've already created 2 additional users next to the admin account, okay? There are basically 3 roles within Enterprise AI. You have the super admin, which can do everything, right? You can create users, you can delete users, you can get models, you can create endpoints, you can make changes, et cetera, okay? You can do everything. Then you have the AI ML admin, which has specific rights and capabilities. Pretty much everything with the exception of creating users. And then you have the AI ML user, which can also create models or get models and create endpoints, but cannot update, etc. It cannot do any user activity, right? So it's more of a very basic user, which you would give possibly to like a developer as an example, right? Or a data scientist as an example, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the admin account right now. I'm going to log in as when we actually download the model, create the endpoint, right, for the model, and we actually bring it into an application. I'm going to be doing that as a AI ML admin, okay? But I wanted to show you and browse through this with all the access through admin. So the first thing you're going to do is create these users. Now, what's great about these users is these users are not just tied back to the capability with an NAI, but also must right, leverage their own API keys to Hugging Face or NVIDIA NIMs, etc. So when they log in, they're going to have to create, right? They have to set up their own keys within settings, right? So, and as an admin, I have my Hugging Face model hub token, right, with my access token, and my NVIDIA NGC access token, right? Now, you're going to have to know a little bit about this, right? So if you want to use open source models from NVIDIA or from Hugging Face, especially in Hugging Face, you're going to have to request access within Hugging Face for that model. So you have to create a Hugging Face account. You're going to create an API key, right, within Hugging Face account. And then the models that you want to test and leverage, you have to go in and request access for some, not all, for some of those models, right? So Llama is an example, which I'm going to be doing today, is a model you have to request access for. They're very quick on providing access. Matter of fact, they're much quicker than they used to be. Okay. I've asked for access and got it instantaneously. Okay. For specific models. So again, you're asking for access for these open source models. And that way that this API key, this access token, will give you access to actually download the model and use the model. Okay. Now, you don't have to download physically the model and upload it to a storage medium, a storage service, a data service like a object service or a NFS share. We will do that for you. You also have the ability to actually download models and upload them, though, if you so choose. Okay? And I'm going to show you what that process looks like here in a little bit. There's also Pulse. So I don't think I talked about this before. I may have talked about it in episode 1, but Pulse is basically our call home feature where we extrapolate, right, data from your clusters, right, and your services, not customer data, telemetry data, usage, errors, things like that. Okay. And what that does is allows us to give you insights, right, through our machine learning models, right, on the back end of Nutanix, but also be proactive with support. So if we detect that there's a drive failure or something like that happens in the infrastructure component, we will be proactive. Sometimes before you even open a ticket will automatically be created and a drive will be already in route. Okay, and that happens, or a power supply or something like that, right? So that's what Pulse does. I'm in a lab, so I have Pulse disabled. Okay, so when I go into the Kubernetes services, you'll see Pulse pod, right, as 0-1. It's not enabled because I haven't enabled it here. Okay. Now, We're going to go up here to audit events. So audit events basically allows you to look at who's doing what, when they did it, and what they did. Okay. And of course, that's very important, right? You want to have those audit trails onto who's doing what, especially with this, because again, what is NAI providing? And maybe I should have took a step back to really talk about this, right? It's providing three core things. The first thing it's providing is inference models or models and API inferencing management, okay, and control. It's providing you safeguards, right, against model access, right, inference point access, etc. And most importantly, it's providing you a safe platform to run this on. Okay. Now, if you decide to use the Nutanix platform, right? Of course, if you decide to run this on a third-party platform or in the cloud, you're going to have to implement your own safeguards. But Nutanix, by design, right, and of course by feature set, which we talked about some of those things like flow microsegmentation, how our data services, right, look at your data to look for anomalies around ransomware, things like that, right? All of this data is actually being looked at through those things, or you can leverage things like flow, right, from an accessibility perspective as well. So you're able to really safeguard this environment, and that's what enterprise customers are looking for. They don't want to take their data and just throw it out there, right? They want to have safeguards around their data. They want to have safeguards around who's accessing what, and they want to have, of course, auditability around what folks are doing, so they can look at those things. All right. When we go into endpoints, there is no inference endpoint created. We're going to do that. Let's go into models. You can see here that I have three models here that I've already downloaded, and two are from NVIDIA NIM and one is from Hugging Face. Okay. And what we're going to do is I'm going to log out and log in as the AI ML admin user, M. Sheehy. And when I log into that, we're going to actually import a model. I'm going to show you what that process looks like. And we're going to create an endpoint. And then we're going to use it in a real test application. We're going to be using anything LLM. And then I'm going to get into the power of this in the other demo environment to actually see the full power of this. Okay. So again, you see the models here. You see that they're active. This means that they're ready, right, to be used to create an endpoint, right? And so I have a Mistral 7B instruct model. Let's just do actually, no, let's not do that. We have three models, and you can see here I have this Nemo Guard model. It's a safety model, which I think is going to tie into what we're going to get into a little bit in a little bit later when we get to the big picture, right, around what you can really do with this platform. So let me log out here, and I'm going to log in as the AI ML admin. And now I'm logged in as MSheehy. You can see up here at the right-hand corner, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import a model. And the model I'm going to import, okay, is going to be the Llama model. But, okay, I want to just show you this. So there are models that we have pre-validated. There's 17 currently in 2.2, right? That basically says this model's been pre-validated and qualified to run a Nutanix. CPU memory requirements for the model are auto-populated when deployed. So when we deploy the endpoint, you don't have to determine what CPU RAM requirements for the inference endpoint. Okay, we'll do that for you. Then there are models, when we get to show the NIMS models, right? There are some models there you can download that are not validated. Some are validated, okay? But what we're going to do is we're going to pick the 3.2 1B instruct. So I'm going to pick this, and I'm going to select import. And I'm going to name this, let me just make this easy, the model instance. And I don't like to use capitalization, so I'm going to change this, or dots. And I'm going to now import this model. And you can see here over to the right here, it's pending. But what's actually happening, right? I think it's important you guys understand. So now I'm in Kubernetes here, and I'm in kubectl. So let's do a get all namespace NIA admin. And what you see here is you see this job that's running, right? And it's this job. What it's doing is it's downloading the model, and then it's actually sending that to a PVC. Okay, so we do a kget PVC. You'll see that these PVCs are created. Okay, you can see one that was created 41 seconds ago. And this was a dynamic PVC that's created on our Nutanix Unified Storage Platform. Remember, I talked about being able to dynamically create PVCs using Filer, right? Nutanix Unified Storage for Filer, and actually dynamically creating PVC. So what we're doing is we're downloading this model and uploading this model into this PVC as an NFS share. So that model can then be serviced from this PVC and be fed into the GPU memory, okay, when we create the endpoint. Okay, so that's exactly what's happening here. So this job, right, in the NAI admin-admin namespace is actually doing that. Downloading the model, saving onto the NFS share, automatically created the PVC. And as a matter of fact, why don't we just show you that, right? So again, it goes back to what we did this before, right? When we did Kubernetes and we talked about persistent data services. And now we're on our filer, and you can see these shares that have been created. 4 of these shares have been created because remember, I have 3 models, and now I'm downloading the 4th. So now there's another share. The other PVC is for an application that we did when we did the Kubernetes, the NKP Kubernetes demo, okay, in episode 4. All right. So let's go back here and let's see where we're at. So you can see here that the model has been downloaded and it's active. Okay, so now it's green and active and it's ready to go. So now you're ready to create a endpoint. So let's go in here and create a new endpoint, and we're going to call this Llama 32.8b instruct. That might be too long. Let's see. No, that's good. And we're going to use, we'll just use this right now. We'll call this the Llama Hugging Face anything LLM demo. Okay. Then we're going to select our model instance. And because it was a certified or pre-validated model, I don't have to input any of the custom configuration. So you could change it, right? And you could use TGI or VLLM. TGI is the default for Hugging Face models, okay? And you can change this if you want, but I'm going to leave it blank because it's pre-validated. It'll automatically create the inference service for me with the right amount of compute, okay? I'm going to do one instance, and I'm going to use the API key, AI test key, okay? Now, you're probably wondering, where did that key come from? Well, if you didn't have a key created, you would go in here and you would create a new API key, and you would download that information to have it ready, okay? Because you're going to need that to access the endpoint, right? So I've already created it. So let's go ahead and hit create. And this is now going to create the service, right? The inference service. So if we go back into Kubernetes and do kget pod name, right? And we watch, you can see here that there's something going on, right? 13 seconds ago. And when this becomes ready, we'll be able to actually see the inferencing service right within Kubernetes. So again, why is this all what is all making this work together, right? Again, it goes back to all of those prerequisites, right? Not so much Istio right now, but definitely around Knative serving and Kserve. Definitely around the fact that I've created a node pool with a GPU, of course, okay? Being able to leverage a GPU. NAI being installed and understanding that it sees the infrastructure behind it, the Kubernetes infrastructure, including the GPU node, right? And all that working together, right, to automate all of this. So when this is done, this is going to become active, okay? And when it becomes active, we're going to look at the endpoint. We're going to test it, all right? So let's just wait a little bit and see what happens. There we go. Now it's active. That was pretty quick. It was pretty quick to download a model, have it ready, and now I have an inference endpoint. So what does that look like? So before we get into the details here, you can see here now I have running here, 2 pods running. Now what if I do a kget isvc, now you see that you have an inference endpoint at the ready, okay? Ready for your usage, all right? So now you can have an application target this endpoint for inferencing, right? Using, again, what it's intended for. Remember, a lot you're using it for what it's intended for, and that's text generation. This is a text generation model, and that's what we need to leverage it for. You can see here underneath text generation. Now, I want to go back to models because what if I wanted to use a NVIDIA model and I want to use something else? So we're going to talk more about these here in a little bit, but there are other model types that are coming out, right? Of course, safety models. We're going to talk about that. There's re-ranker. There's embedding models to do RAG, right? And we're going to show you some of that. There's also reasoning models, which we really didn't get into yet. That'll really start to come into play here soon. There's safety models, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But again, you can see there's different model types coming out. And of course, there's also SLMs that people are taking advantage of now that are very good. You know, Daemon talked about this last week where SLMs are becoming, very, very good from an output perspective, right? And not having a lot of hallucinations, and at a much lower financial impact to you, right? A much lower financial obligation. So, don't think you have to use LLMs for everything. You may use SLMs for certain things. You may use LLMs for other things. But again, that optionality and choice is now there. Okay. Okay. So now that we have this endpoint created, we want to look at it. Okay. So let's look at this endpoint, and you can see here it provides you an endpoint URL. This is the URL you're going to give to your developer. So your developer is going to create the application, whether it's a chat bot or something, and the developer is going to call the API, right, for the inference endpoint, right? And here's the key. Here's the AI, the key that you would, the AI test key that I created that you would also provide. So you provide that developer the URL and the AI key. Okay. Now, how do we know it's working though? Okay. Well, we don't. So let's test it. So there are sample requests that we have built here. Okay. So let's explain how deep neural networks work, and you can hit test. And you can see here, that was pretty fast. The output of that was pretty fast. Let's describe the landscapes of Mars, right? And you can do that. Or you can do a custom request. Tell me why Nutanix AI is a great solution. Right, so here you're getting data, you're getting output pretty quickly. The L4 is working fairly well for this model, and it's a smaller model. Look, it's not a large model. So, will the hallucinations be more? The answer would be yes. Will the accuracy be less? Yes, but how much less? That's what you have to determine, right, through your POC, your testing, and how much value you're getting out of it, right? So that's one way to test. There's also other ways to test. You can actually, I think you can actually do a curl command. But before we do that, let me just lower this really quick. Here's a sample request. You can actually do a curl, right? And you can input your API key here, okay, next to the authorization. And when you do that, if we want to do that, let's do that right now, okay? Might as well not do it, right? So let's go here, we'll paste that in. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the API key, of course. Now, I could have exported the API key with that variable, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to get the API key. Okay, going to pass this in. API key invalid. Did I not do the API key right? There it is. Okay, so I had some syntax wrong. And by the way, I'm using Warp. I think I talked about this last week or the week before. If you guys aren't using Warp from a terminal perspective, you're crazy. Because, I had a problem with the syntax of that, and it fixed it automatically for me. Right? This is using AI at Warp. Okay, so kind of similar to Copilot, right? In fact, they'll give you the right syntax. But I can also go um, to AI mode, right, and just do plain text. Okay, and I can pick the model that I want to use as well. So if I go to Control Shift I can actually pick the model that I want to leverage. Of course, there's some cost to this. You have to actually sign up. Okay, so let me go back to um, the uh, the non-agent mode, the actual. But you can see here, I'm getting output from the curl command that I asked about to explain deep neural networks. Okay, so we know it's working. We know it's working from a remote access. So this is a WSL session on my workstation, right? That I'm connecting to the endpoint. So it's an external source accessing the inference endpoint. So you know that's working. So you know the um, networking is working fine. Okay. So now that that's done and we have our endpoint, let's launch anything LLM. So this is basically a free workstation type LLM solution. You guys probably heard of Olama. There's anything LLM. There's other ones out there, um, and you could use some of those too. But I wanted to show anything LLM because it actually gives a nice little demo we can do, and we can add RAG into this as well. Okay, so very simple. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to the LLM provider, and what we have to do here is we actually have to use a generic generic open AI LLM. Okay, so what we're providing from an endpoint perspective is an open AI compatible API. Okay, but it's generic. It's not open AI's. It's Nutanix, right? But it's still using that open AI API standard. Okay, so now you can see here I have the URL, the API key. I want to see if this is the same one. Let me just make sure. So I'm going to use the same API key that we use in the testing. Okay. I want to make sure that the chat model is the same. So we want to go back up here and make sure that here's the chat model. Llama 32-1B instruct. So go back to anything LLM and I want to hit save changes. Okay. Now, when we do that, we're going to go back here. We're going to create a new workspace and we'll just call it NAI demo. We'll hit save. And those people that know me know I'm a big Star Wars fan. So I think what I'm going to do is just ask a simple question: how many guns on the Death Star? Could not connect. So let's see if I did something wrong here. System default. Bear with me a second here. This is a live demo, folks. This is what happens. Okay, let's go under here. I'm going to delete all of this. Okay, so in anything LLM, in fact, in most cases, you're not going to provide this full endpoint. It's going to be the endpoint up to V1. So we'll copy that, put that in here. We're going to do the generic API key. We're going to copy that. Generic API key is this one. Copy that. We'll hit save changes. Okay, then we're going to go back here. Let's just make sure that our chat settings are right. Should be system default. Should be system default because that's the one it will leverage. Update workspace. Hopefully this works. Okay. So I asked basically how many guns are on the Death Star. So the Death Star had a total of 1,220 turns, estimated to have around 9,000. I don't really know how accurate this is, okay? But I do have data that I know is accurate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new thread, okay? And I'm going to upload a document. So what we're basically doing here is we're basically doing a simple RAG. I have a Death Star technical companion document, right? So assume that in your environment you have your own data that you want to upload. So you have the model, right, that has world information, and it may not be accurate to what you're trying to achieve, right, based on your business requirements or your business information or your data. So how do I extrapolate that? Well, you extrapolate that through RAG. And so all I'm doing here is creating a simple RAG. I'm moving that data into the workspace and I'm embedding it right now. So what's happening is LLM is actually embedding this data. It's chunking it, right? So that way, when I do a search, it's going to give me accurate information, okay? So now that this is uploaded successfully, okay, it's embedded. I'm going to go into the new thread. I'm going to say how many guns on the Death Star. Okay. So you can see here, I'm getting much more granular and much more accurate information because I'm using my data. Okay. And it's actually showing me where I got the data from, right? It's got it from the Death Star technical PDF. Okay. So this is just a simple example of how I'm connecting to my endpoint, okay, that's hosted internally. And I'm just uploading my data and I'm doing simple chat, right? Interaction, and I'm getting simple feedback from the chat, okay? But what I'm also getting back is accurate information as it pertains to what I'm doing because I have the data already in place, right? Okay, so that just, again, just a quick demo of anything LLM connecting back to the endpoint. But what is happening here? Like, what visibility am I getting back here? So let's go back to the dashboard, and you can see here that I can actually see what's happening. You know, how often my endpoint is being hit, how many successful requests or failed requests or invalid requests did I have. Matter of fact, when I actually did those 2 tests on the invalid request of anything LM, it gave me response of 2 invalid requests. Okay. What are the trends? What's the health of my infrastructure? What's my utilization? You can tell my utilization is very, very limited. Okay. You know, what do my trends look like from an API perspective? What endpoints are being used? So if I had multiple endpoints here, and what user, right? So you can get all this information of the API keys, endpoints, your infrastructure metrics, all of those things right within the dashboard of NAI. Okay. So this is the demo that I have in the lab. I know it's a very simple demo, but I really want you to think about what we're doing here. Okay. We're not tying you in to leveraging a third party, right, or a proprietary model or place to use a model. So, for example, we're not tying you into using AWS or Azure, right, or even OpenAI as an example, okay? Because when you use those things, you're being charged by the drip. And so I wanted to show you really quick what I mean by that. So there's a user on YouTube that I follow. His name is Leo Van Zel. I'd ask that you go to his channel. He's got great information on how to build AI agents and look at Flowwise and using Flowwise to do that. Okay. Now I've built an AI agent that he demoed, and I just want to show you something because when you leverage OpenAI or any of those third parties, you're going to be charged for that. Okay. So, and you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that in a safe manner, meaning you're going to go out and you're going to leverage these models and your information is going out and it's being saved and captured by OpenAI as an example. So you can see here I have an OpenAI account, and you can see here I have my usage dashboard up here. Okay, and you can see to the right hand corner that I'm being charged for every time I hit the OpenAI API. Okay, so when I go in here and I run this, and this is a multi-agentic workflow, by the way. Just think about this. This is a developer model where you have a supervisor who manages two workers. Supervisor agent basically is using a reasoning model to understand exactly what you're asking for, and then it's telling the worker agents what to do, and then it's giving me feedback. So how does it look? So I have a software developer, right, who's going to create the code initially. Then I have a code reviewer who's going to review the code and give feedback to the software developer to make sure my code is is up to date, right? Is safe, is effective, is performant, etc. So let's do that now. So I'm going to maximize the chat window. I'm going to say build me a marketplace application for my retail web store. And you can see what's happening here. It's actually going out, it's telling the supervisor what I want to do, and then the supervisor is going to the software developer, and now the software developer is now given me code, okay, and created this project structure, the application code, okay, and now the supervisor said, okay, you gave me this code back, now we need to have the code reviewer review it. And now the code reviewer has reviewed the code and gave feedback around code quality. And then, of course, the supervisor comes back and says, implement the suggested changes from the code reviewer, okay, using what the code reviewer suggested. Right? And then it came back and said, okay, I've implemented these changes. Sorry, I'm going too fast. I've implemented these changes. And then write unit integration tests for the marketplace application to ensure functionality and stability. So the software developer updates the README file, right, to document, and then does the implementation, runs the test, and then says finished, and then provides this information back to me. This is the power of multi-agentic AI, by the way. I mean, think about this. Now, a lot of developers come back and say, well, how accurate is this? And I get it. I understand that. I'm not trying to, again, it goes back to my conversation with Daemon. This is more about augmentation. Is AI smart enough to take the place of a seasoned developer today? The answer is no, right? But a junior developer, we're getting there, okay? So, for example, what about all the things that, seasoned software developers don't really want to do or they waste time on, right? Like writing scripts or those types of things. Maybe a junior developer can do those things and you can hand it off to an agent and you can go through this multi-agentic workflow to actually get that done. So that's the power of agentic AI, which we were talking about before. Now I want to go back really quick to what I was talking about in usage, right? So if I hit refresh, today's the 29th, and you can see here that I'm being charged again, after all these hits. Now, if you're using AI pervasively, like across your environment on a large scale, imagine the cost that this implements. Now, I'm only using one endpoint right now. Now, multi-agentic AI will introduce multi-endpoints, or even the demo I'm going to talk about next and actually conclude with is using multiple 3 models. Okay, so it's 3 inference endpoints that I'm calling to make sure that I get the outcome that I want. And if I'm doing that in the cloud, at Azure native, like if I'm doing it in AWS, Amazon Bedrock, or if I'm doing it in Azure AI services or GCP, or I'm using a third party like OpenAI to call, right? I'm going to be charged for that. Now, the beauty about what NAI delivers is the ability to use open source models that you host where you're not paying every time you hit the API endpoint, right? You're paying for NAI, of course, and the infrastructure to support your applications and your models and your things like that, okay? But you're paying for that once. You're not being hit. You're not being charged by the drip of hitting the API every time you want to use it, okay? And that's one of the beauties about NAI. And of course, NAI also gives you the ability to use all these different models, right? Meaning you're not locked into OpenAI, you're not locked into, Mistral, or locked into all these different models, right, that you want to use. You can use several different models, whether they're from Hugging Face or NIMS or even open source models like DeepSeek. You want to use all those models? Go for it. And you can use a mixture of those models in your environment. So let's talk about what that looks like. So I'm going to get out of my lab environment and get into um, more of a enterprise production environment from a demo perspective. Before I do that, I just want to just show you, go back to the FlowWise dashboard here though, okay? Over to the left here, you'll see that I have a chat OpenAI custom. Well, this is my model, okay, that I'm hosting on NAI. So you could just replace this and you can insert this, right, and connect it. And now, instead of calling OpenAI, I'm calling my on-prem models. And now I'm not being charged, right, as I go through this. Now, I can't demo this, unfortunately, because FlowWise, and of course, this is my mistake, and I'm fully transparent, I'm using a self-signed certificate within NAI, and FlowWise does not support that. OpenAI doesn't support that, okay? So this would not work. Even though I can see it hit the endpoint, and I can see it on the NAI side, it will not function, okay? Now, this is just a piece of software. Of course, in your production environment, your POC, you'll have a real certificate, right, for your NAI endpoints, not a self-signed certificate. So it'll work fine. All right. Now I'm going to show you what that looks like in a production environment. So let's go here. And you can see here I have another environment. I'm in FlowWise again. And I wanted to show you this chat flow really quick. This is just a quick chat flow. But essentially, we have a conversational retrieval QA chain and a chat flow that leverages 3 different models. Okay, so we're leveraging the Llama 318B model, right, as the chat model, but we're also leveraging a different model down here for the safety model, or the Llama 31 Guard model for safety. And this does simple prompt moderation, which we'll talk about, and I'm going to show you how that works in a minute. But within the RAG, okay, within the RAG, we're actually using an embedding model as well. So what does this all look like? Well, let's go back really quick, and I'll show you what this looks like. So if you go to document stores, I have the NDB S3 documents. This is the source of your documents, right? So you basically have a bucket, and you decided this is the bucket you created, and now you know what data needs to go in this bucket for your RAG model, right? To actually provide your data to the chat model, right? To get more accurate information based on what you're trying to achieve in your environment. It's being fed from S3. Okay, so if I go in here and I look, well, what is it doing? So if I do upsert chunks, what is it actually doing? Well, we're using an OpenAI embedding model that's running on NAI. We're using a Postgres database that's running on NDB, which is our database as a service. And it's using a Postgres vector and a record manager for Postgres. Okay, so I'm feeding, right, the data from S3 objects, right? I'm using an embedding model. It's going to chunk it out. It's going to use a vector database managed by Postgres, and it's going to use a Postgres record manager, all right, for my data. So now my RAG is ready, okay? Now, when I go back to the chat flow, it's also using, again, like I talked about before, it's also using this Nemo Guard model as well. So within this environment, I'm using 3 endpoints, okay, and 3 different models to provide the outcome that I want. Number 1, the original model for the chat input, okay. Number 2, the embedding model used to embed my data into the vector database, right, on Postgres for my RAG, for my data. And when I say RAG, I mean retrieval augmented generation. So what I'm doing is I'm augmenting my data with the model. Okay, that way it's more accurate to the information I need. So imagine how powerful this is in like law firms, right, where you need to get really accurate with your information, or other financial firms as an example, looking at documents, reading spreadsheets, all those things, understanding numbers, etc., getting accurate information. But I also want to make sure it's safe in my environment, meaning that my users can't ask questions or get information that's unsafe or is determined illegal, as an example. And we're using the third model, the NemoGuard model endpoint, okay, to make sure it's moderated. So if I go into the chat application, this is the chat application here, which is pointing to that, I can ask the question. The first question I want to ask, though, is I want to make sure that I have guardrails in place and the safety model, right, is actually working. How do I rob? Let's do this. Steal a car. Cannot process. Input violates content moderation policies or what Nemo guardrails is determined is not safe. Okay, so you see here that the guardrails are in place, and it's basically saving, your users from doing things, maybe that are intentful or not intentful, right? Sometimes we do things that don't have the intent of wrongdoing, but they could be wrong, right? And so we want to make sure that we're in a safe environment as well. But let's see what happens when I ask another question here. How do I install Nutanix NIA? So we don't have documents uploaded for this, okay, in the RAG. So it's not understanding. Can you please provide more context? Let's see if I say Nutanix Enterprise AI. Right. Now, if I uploaded things within here that had the information, right? Say I had a document or I had my user guide for NAI, it would give me the information. Just like I did to the Death Star, and it gave me accurate information, that's what it would do. Okay? So again, this is just showing you how you can create a more integrated solution, right? This is just a simple chatbot. I showed you the agentic one. This is more of a chatbot one and using RAG. And it gives you this holistic view of what you can do. I mean, just hopefully get your mind working on thinking about how that you could leverage this in your enterprise. Now, again, it really goes back to the power of NAI providing you that freedom and flexibility and choice, right, around where it runs. Remember, I said it can run on the Nutanix platform, right? In my case, I'm using the Nutanix platform holistically. I'm using HCI, the storage, the compute, right, to run my Kubernetes solution. I'm using GPUs that are being passed through GPU node pools. I'm using Filer NUS, right, to provide the NFS shares for my models. Using NDB to host the database for my vector database for RAG. Using objects to store my data, right, that I want to have embedded in my vector database for RAG, as an example. So now I had this complete platform that's not stitched together. It works together by design. And that's the value of a platform. Something that provides multiple capabilities that's still flexible and works by design. And if it doesn't work by design, let me rephrase that. Works by design, whether it's native, right, to the platform, or using an integration, right? So for example, using some automation framework that's that can call your RV4 APIs, or there's some integration with ServiceNow or whatever, right? Imagine tying in ServiceNow to this. Now a data scientist asks for a endpoint and can ask ServiceNow, open a ticket, and then have it come back and actually deploy this and provide the API URL, the endpoint URL, and the API key, as an example, right? So just to give you an idea of the power of that. Then, secondly, the financial aspect of this. I talked about this, right? The financial aspect is really about leveraging the models that you want to leverage on your terms where you're not paying by the drip, okay? You are leveraging the model as much as you want. And you're not being charged every time you hit the API endpoint like I showed you with OpenAI or any cloud service as an example. And lastly, if you decide to go down this path, you have the optionality of seeing a full platform at play that's simple, okay? That's easy to operate, simple to manage, simple to implement, okay? And just easier overall and giving you this great experience, right? So from the foundational, I want to get out of Broadcom, I need a platform to do that. From that foundational perspective of VMs to running containers to running AI service capabilities to running data services, whether it's structured data on NDB or unstructured data. This is a full platform that Nutanix provides. And this is what you don't see in other YouTube videos about Nutanix. Now, we have Nutanix University, you'll see it there, but I've seen it over and over again of people that like to play with Nutanix who have no concept of the power of the platform. Okay, and what I mean by that is they'll come out and they'll say, "Well, is a good virtualization alternative to VMware?" Absolutely, it is. They're just not looking at it in depth, right? Because they have no interest to look at it in depth. So I implore you to look at the platform, right? You can start at the foundational level, which we did. You can move right through the process, and that's where a lot of customers go through. But I will tell you, in the AI use case and the cloud native use cases we're seeing expand today, they are looking for platforms that provide flexibility and choice, the ability to run it how they want to run it, right? Just like NAI runs on non-Nutanix infrastructure, runs on bare metal or in the cloud, okay? Just like NKP runs on bare metal or non-Nutanix infrastructure or in the cloud, right? Or being able to have a full platform capability with the Nutanix platform on the back end. Okay, so I hope you guys enjoyed the session today. I know I went a little bit over an hour, not too bad, but I think this is a really hot topic right now, and I think just looking at AI again, going through those three things I talked about. Start looking at AI internally for your users. Know how it works. Fundamentally, look at processes and things that are complex that you think AI could deliver on, right? And then you get into workforce augmentation. Okay, don't try to boil the ocean with AI. You don't have to do that. You can grow into this, and you can be iterative. And even though it's moving fast, you don't have to move as fast as AI is moving. Okay, I mean it's the same thing with Kubernetes and cloud native. There's always new things coming out around cloud native. There's always new companies and new projects that are happening for cloud native and Kubernetes. And there's still a lot of customers still at the foundational layer or just starting out. You don't have to worry about those things yet. All right. Let's start somewhere. Let's show the value and then start being iterative, right, across your environments. Okay. So have a great day. I think I'm going to take a week off. And when we come back the week after next, what I want to get into is more integration with Nutanix. Now, what I mean by that is let's remove ourselves from the native services and let's start talking about the services that enterprise customers and you are all using, like Ansible, Terraform, ServiceNow, other things, right? And how we integrate those things and how they can be leveraged in a lot of what we talked about already. Okay. So hope you have a great day and a very productive week ahead. And I look forward to talking with you again. Have a good one.